here's a mistake I see all the time and an easy fix. So the mistake is that people oftentimes are making what they're talking about them. And so the big shift you can make is switching it from first person, from I and we, to you. Here's a really easy example of that. So instead of saying, I'm going to teach you how to blah, 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 you switch it to, you're going to learn how to blah, blah, blah. All of a sudden, the entire shift is all about them. And when you start thinking that way, it really adjusts how you deliver that information, because you start thinking, what does the audience need to hear? What does the person really need to hear? How can we make it about them and not so much about us or about me?
Welcome to the BetterCulture Podcast, where we make the clear connection between better culture and better business. This podcast is for leaders who want to build stronger teams, drive thriving companies, and enjoy your leadership role along the way. Now here's your host, Brett Hogeveen, a leadership and culture aficionado, keynote speaker, and co-founder of BetterCulture.
Today's guest is Annie Figenshu, content strategist, author, and the person thought leaders call when they want their ideas to actually move people. Before she was building content systems and communication strategy, Annie spent 15 years on stage in New York City performing improv and studying what makes an audience actually pay attention. Now she helps leaders and thought leaders turn their strongest ideas into clear, strategic content that drives action. Whether you write, speak, teach, consult, or lead, or just want people at work to actually listen to you, you're going to walk away from this episode with practical, fun, improv-inspired maybe, ways to communicate more effectively and make your message stick. Annie, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. So glad to be here speaking to all of these leaders.
Absolutely. Well, I wonder, just for our audience, you have such an intriguing background. Would you mind just telling us a little bit about the time you spent in New York doing improv and sort of how that experience shapes how you think about capturing and holding an audience's attention?
Sure. Yeah. So I spent 15 years doing shows that were usually around an hour and a half, sometimes 2 hours, that completely had no script. We had no script, no sets, no lights, nothing. And oftentimes a part of the show was that we would create a musical on the spot. Sometimes it'd be 20 minutes long. Sometimes it'd be a half hour. And so even the choreography, the lyrics, the rhymes, all of that was made up. And I learned a lot then about story structure, basically, so that way, if you have nothing else to go on, at least we sort of understood the rules of the game, so to speak. And there are many improv rules, and then there's sort of story rules as well. And we would oftentimes use them when we were creating musicals on the spot or when we were creating scenes. So I actually started learning then what was going to help an audience really engage, right? Like, what were the words that I was going to say that were going to get a reaction from an audience? And then I realized later on now in the work that I do how important that is. But what actually created the bridge from performing and doing improv comedy at Chicago City Limits and at Broadway's Next Hit Musical and all around the world was that one of the shows that I was in would perform. We were scheduled to do 5 shows a week off Broadway. That was the schedule. But we had the rule that if there were more people on stage than in the audience, the show would get canceled. And there were 5 of us on stage. And the amount of times that the show got canceled was demoralizing to me.
No. Was it because people didn't show up at the start, or they would leave, or what do you mean it got canceled? It got canceled before it started? It didn't get canceled during, did it?
Hold on, Brett. Why would they leave? What?
I just asked him. Okay.
No, they just the audience wasn't there, right? So especially like in the early 2000s, before social media, before even people knew about like digital marketing, before all of those terms were coined, if you had a show in New York City, one of the ways that you would have to get people to would be to pay to have an ad in the New York Times or pay to have an ad on radio. And that was expensive. And so the producers didn't always have that kind of cash flow. And so there just wasn't always that kind of an audience. And so I just felt like, wow, so that was really hard, was not having people at the shows and then having to get all ready, all psyched to do a show and then just leave. And I realized, like, I think that there's a way that we can get more people to shows. And when a lot of times improvisers get asked to perform at like big company meetings. Like, probably if you're listening to this, you've probably had an improv group like come in or teach you about getting off your script or things like that, right? Yeah. Okay. So you've seen that. So we were performing at a company's big meeting, and the person who came before us is the marketing guy, Chris Brogan, and he was talking about this new thing called Twitter and how audiences could get more how companies could get more customers by using this new thing. And I was like, I think we could get more people to our show if we learn how to do this. So that kind of got me intrigued with marketing, but even now, I still use so much of what I learned in story structure and knowing how an audience is going to engage with something. And that's the kind of skills that improv taught me that have helped me now with the work that I do.
So interesting. Now, I want to explain the comment that I put in there, all right? Because
Sure. Okay, Brett.
When we do training, Annie, this is not a reflection on what I thought your shows would be like. When we do leadership training, often at the start, I'll make a joke that, hey, as long as, because I want my leadership training audience to be comfortable, they feel like they can get up, grab a snack or take a phone call if they really need to or whatever. Assume there's 400 people in the room. I'll usually say, I'll keep going as long as there's still 2 people sitting here. Now, I've never had that happen where the whole audience leaves, but so that's probably more about me than it was about you. So
that's okay. You know what? I get it. And I'm not to say that people did not leave the show at times. They certainly did, but I love what you said though about that, because so often when I'm talking to clients and they say, should we bother sending out an email about this? We don't have as many people on our email list as we hoped we would have, or whatever it is. I viscerally remember what it was like to do a show for 60 people, because especially like smaller houses in New York City and comedy clubs, like it's like 60, 100 people. So I'll say to them, like, if there were 60 people in a room, would you still tell them this message? And so that oftentimes will help them rethink whether or not that message is worth sharing with people. And so I love that idea, Brett, that you were saying about if there's 2 people in a room, you'll still talk to them.
Yeah, exactly. Well, all right. So I want to know, let's talk about a business related topic. So I was reading, I actually don't know this story. So you and I have actually worked together. You've done some work for us at BetterCulture, which was fantastic and we appreciate, but I don't actually know the story. I was reading on your bio that you helped someone who was a participant on the TV show Shark Tank craft their message. And that message ultimately ended in, I believe, $250,000 of funding for the business. So would you mind sharing just with our audience a little bit about that? Like, how did your approach or the approach to that messaging actually resonate to business results? Tell us about that story.
Yeah, well, Ari Siegel from History by Mail, which is a very cool business. Definitely Google it. They do such neat stuff. But Ari reached out to me mostly for just, hey, how can I adjust the words that are on my website? How can I adjust the words in my email? And that's how we first started working together. And during the course of that time, he said, I actually had this super top secret at the time that he had been getting closer and closer to Shark Tank. And so he had actually filmed his episode. And so we had to work on how he was going to present his pitch. What were the things that he was going to say? And so we really focused on, okay, how do we make this theatrical? How do we make this exciting? And how do we deliver information very succinctly? Because he only had 90 seconds for his initial pitch. So we really worked through literally every single word and figuring out which ones were the words that were going to help land. What words were extra? What words were filler? What if we had this word at the end of the sentence and we really hit that? How would that be the operative word? And what information did the sharks need in order for them to decide whether or not this was going to be a product that other people would want and that they would want to invest in? So that we worked on that for so long. And I have to say, Ari did so much work as well. He had cardboard cutouts of the sharks. He would practice his pitch every single day. Oh my gosh, he was so prepared. So I mean, the work that we did, he has said was very, very important, but he put in so much time as well to really polish, to get those reps in, to really polish his pitch. And yeah, I mean, sorry. What were you going to say?
I didn't mean to interrupt. You used a word there that I want to go deeper into. You said you wanted to present in a way that was theatrical. Okay. Now, I think that's really interesting because when most business people think about communicating, that is not on their mind. It is, how can I make sure I communicate clearly, right? Maybe succinctly. But seldom are they thinking, how can I make this theatrical? Tell me a little bit about that, because I understand exactly why being a bit theatrical with the way that you communicate helps get the message through, helps keep an audience's attention. But tell me more about that, because I think it's something leaders should think a bit about in the way that they choose to communicate.
Okay, so I love this. Yes. So one of the things that you can really do in order to be more theatrical is to really take those moments, right? So even though he only had 90 seconds, the initial idea is to get as much information as you can in that 90 seconds. And we found that instead, taking the time to pause, to allow a word to land, to allow a moment to land, really gave the sharks a chance to have those ideas sink in. And so that's how you can really up the ante on what it is that you're saying to make it a little bit more theatrical, to have those pauses or to allow your voice to kind of come up at just a certain time. So that way the words ring in a way that whether you're talking to a group of people in a small meeting or whether you're making a YouTube video that's going to go out on your company's channel, you can use little elements like that to help amplify the words that you've already picked out.
I love that. So maybe, I don't know if any examples come to mind of ways, specific things to do that, or if you'd rather, I know you've worked with a lot of interesting clients and brands, and I would love to know also, what are some of the most common messaging or marketing challenges or mistakes that you see people make, right? So you can take that either direction, but think business, think clients, either what are some things that really work, and you can go specific if you want, and what are some common mistakes that you see in the way that organizations or leaders choose to communicate?
Sure. Okay, one of the easiest things that you can do when you're delivering your message is so often your natural instinct is at the end of a sentence to have the tone go down, like to say something, for example, of, and then we went out and we got a drink of water, and then your voice goes down. It can change how people are paying attention to you if your voice goes up instead. This is one of the first things that I learned in a Shakespeare class that I took back at NYU when I got my BFA in drama, that to go up at the end of the line. So, and then we went out and we got a drink of water. And so not so much using the like up speak that a lot of people in my like elder millennial Gen X generation use, but really sort of to help to connect one sentence to the other so that way the energy doesn't go down, it stays. So that's just one easy way to make things a little bit more theatrical in a very simple way. Now, you asked about the words themselves, though, and what are the mistakes that oftentimes leaders will make when they're delivering material to whether it's just a group of people within their company or to their audience. Here's a mistake I see all the time and an easy fix. So the mistake is that people oftentimes are making what they're talking about them. And so the big shift you can make is switching it from first person, from I and we, to you. Here's a really easy example of that. So instead of saying, I'm going to teach you how to blah, 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 you switch it to, you're going to learn how to blah, blah, blah. All of a sudden, the entire shift is all about them. And when you start thinking that way, it really adjusts how you deliver that information, because you start thinking, what does the audience need to hear? What does the person really need to hear? How can we make it about them and not so much about us or about me?
Yes, that really resonates with me. And it's something personally that I've been trying to work on in the last few years, is much more regularly making sure that my message is serving the audience, not me telling someone what I think, right? And I notice a big difference, and I now see it much more clearly from other people when it's like, that message could have been so much better received if it was given through that lens that you just described.
Right, exactly. You can take a look at an email that you've got going out, whether it's a official communication that's happening within your company, or even just one that you're sending out to another person. Look at the amount of times that you use first person and see where you can adjust it to second person, to you from I. And you will find that that already is such a big shift in how you're thinking about what you're saying.
I love that. Yeah. And it correlates to, I don't know if this is exactly the same theme, but I love to see organizations that communicate with the word we as well. Like it's a we thing as much as it is an I think, et cetera. But like, the difference between I want to make sure we versus like we've got to, right? Like those are two very different approaches, especially from a leader. It's like, we've got to make sure we hit these numbers versus I want to make sure everyone does X, Y, Z so we hit these numbers. That's a different orientation to communication too.
Yes. Now, the grammar nerds who are listening are going to say, wait, but that is still first person. Yes, it is still first person. And so that's why you want to make those choices. Obviously, you need to use first person. There are times where you use I, and that's going to be different versus when you use we, and that's going to be different versus when you use you. They all have value and they all are going to have an impact. You just want to make sure that you are controlling what that impact is. And as I oftentimes say, like, you want to know what the rules are to break them.
Yeah. So my mom was a teacher and likes English, and so she'll be disappointed in me if I don't exactly know my first and second persons, etc. But can I coin a new term? I'd like to think of we as maybe first person inclusive.
Ooh, I don't know if that's a new term. We're gonna have to ask your mom. But yeah, I mean, so it's my 7th grade teacher, Miss Levin, would say it's first person plural, right? So I is singular and we is plural. But yes, it is inclusive. It's this idea of we're all in this together.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, that's wonderful. Wonderful. So any other mistakes or things that you can say, unclear messaging, whether it's from a leader or from a brand, that has really hidden costs or consequences or examples of other things organizations, miss or do wrong. And you can just say, no, Brad, I don't have any others of those. Or you can share a story. Either way.
Sure. I can share a story. Well, here's one also thing like from the theater world that I have found really works well when you're trying to share something. And it's this idea of raising the stakes, right? So oftentimes, a mistake that I will see companies make when they're speaking to their audiences is they'll just say like, hey, here's the thing that's great, or here's the thing that's bad. Or, we want to let you know about this. And what will help create will have more of an impact is when you say, if you get this right, here's what that looks like. So if we, or if you, depending on what it is, right? But if we get this right, if we're able to make this goal for this quarter, or if we're able to do this thing that we've all been working towards, here's what life looks like on the other side. Here's why it's going to be so much better. We see this in movies. We see this in musicals all the time, right? This is why it's going to be so worthwhile. People sing whole songs about it in the first act. And then when it happens in the second act, we're so psyched. On the flip side, it's what happens if you do nothing. what will happen if things stay the same? And what is the impact of that? And so really painting that picture can be so helpful in getting people to take the action that you want them to take, because you're showing them, look, I've already looked ahead. Imagine how great it could be if we all did this thing. Or imagine how your every day could be different if you took this step consistently, whatever it is.
I love it. And to me, that sort of speaks of someone who communicates with vision, right? That you're projecting forward to like what the future could look like, or what could happen if we don't, right? And so that's a term that gets thrown around a lot in the leadership world. But I think that what you described is a really great practical example of what it looks like to communicate with vision, right? That brings people along, or that inspires people on a common path, etc.
Yes. Yeah. And then when you can even more pinpoint what that looks like and give visuals, that is really helpful in the words when you're describing it. And even then, like for your marketing team or for whatever, because then when you say, imagine sitting down at your desk every day and knowing that you've got whatever you need in place. I don't know, I'm making this up on the spot, but then the people who are putting together visuals, maybe it's for a blog post, maybe it's for an email, maybe it's to be incorporated with the video, maybe it's to go on the website. They have the images that they can pull from, whether they're grabbing it from stock images, ones that you've had that are branded, you're creating new ones in AI, whatever it is. When you say, imagine walking into a room and 50 people are all there with all their eyes on you, great. That's easy then to make happen. We can all imagine what that looks like. And then we also have the visuals that can go with it. So raising the stakes is a great way of helping people understand the impact of the step it is that you want them to take.
Yes, I love it. Okay. Would you mind sharing? I would love to hear a little bit about process, things that you do from a process perspective. Let's say you start working with a new client. What are you listening for? What processes do you use to try to help someone sort of separate the signal from the noise, or figure out like what sort of uncover the important things in their messaging, etc.? What someone that looks at this from a branding perspective or a communication perspective, what are some tips or tactics or approaches that you try to use to, separate the wheat from the chaff, or whatever, to try to figure out the right messaging?
Yeah, completely. So the first thing that I'll do is I'll oftentimes try to figure out who is the talent, right? Who's a subject matter expert? Who's the person who's going to be implementing whatever it is? And then I'll try to help be the director, right? So I oftentimes think of it in theater terms, like who's the talent, who's the stage manager, so to speak, and then who's the director. And so, what's that?
Interesting. Sorry.
Yes.
Yeah, I like it.
Yeah. So then what I'll do is really take a look at what it is the goals are that they want, because depending on, is it that we have a new campaign that's coming out? Is it that you're launching a new project? Or is it that you're trying to figure out, look, I feel like I'm putting out so much content and I feel like we're spinning our wheels all the time. Nothing seems to be resonating. What do we do? Right? So once I understand what the goals are, then I look at specifically what is working and let's double down on that. Right? So let's really figure out how can we get the most out of what you are doing. And that's where then I'll start to take a look at what those channels are where people are really resonating, where the audience seems to like it, and then just keep showing up there and giving the people what they want over and over and over again, while also then trying to move the needle in the direction that the business wants to go in. So maybe it's that we need to maybe we know that a lot of people are opening emails for the company, but they're not clicking on things. Well, maybe we need to make things a little bit more succinct. And then we have to really look at the words. Are those words hitting with the audience in a way that they are able to, do they know what action to take? Do they know what you're offering? Do they know how it's going to make their lives better? Have we raised the stakes enough? And so then we'll really parse through the little nitty gritty of that. Or if it's that it's a specific campaign, maybe we're going to come up with some sound bites that we want to use over and over and over again consistently. And those sound bites are what's going to show up, whether it is on social media or whether it's at the big meeting that you're going to have to present it to the entire division, whatever it is, we're going to come up with those sound bites so that way you can be consistent with them over and over again. So it's usually figuring out what the channel is, optimizing that, and then creating the system. So that way you can just use that over and over and over again in a way that's sustainable.
Yeah. So you just said the word sort of sound bites and consistency. And I will tell you, on the surface, those things, like those words, those concepts for communication make a ton of sense to me. And then you're going to have to coach me here, Annie. Okay. So, and then I, as a communicator, I, as someone who has an opportunity to speak on behalf of my brand, I sort of get bored with the thing we came up with last week and end up wanting to say something different, right? And I know this isn't good for me. I know it's not good for my communication. We struggle sometimes at Better Culture to just decide on, a tagline that we're going to stick with, or we're going to, a niche, a thing that we like. And I feel like we're forever experimenting and seldom committing to consistency that we really feel like we've been bought into. And I know you helped us with that on a project. Talk to me a little bit, and maybe one other thing I'll throw in there is I've heard these maxims from marketing and advertising over the years that a prospect needs to hear an advertisement 12 times or something, or see it before they actually hear it. And so again, my suspicion and what all the professionals tell me is consistency really does matter, and et cetera. Can you just fact check that for me? Like, give me some coaching here. How important is consistency versus no, I say it different all the time?
So one thing that you can do is just take a look at the data, right? So when you say fact check, then you can literally fact check, right? So just take a look at when are people clicking on the things that you want them to click on? Can you see those heads nodding when you're speaking, right? Is it hitting? Is it resonating? Do you have anything that is objective that you can go back to? Because what is so important is to remember that you are not your audience, right? There have been so many times that I would say something, or I would think of something to say in front of an audience and be like, this is going to go big. I'm going to get a big laugh out of this. And then I don't. And you think it's going to have an impact. Yep. Okay. Yes.
Been there. Yep.
Yes. So that is
that I make under my breath that I didn't mean to make that actually gets the laugh, right? Or it's something that I wait, you laughed at that? So yeah.
Yes, completely. So that is, if you can find objective things to measure, that's great. So it's yes, we are probably going to get bored with this after a while. And if it is still hitting the way that we want it to hit based on this thing, based on this number, based on this metric, we're going to keep going with it until something else happens and we want to switch it up a little bit. But I think something to remember is that, so my dad used to work in radio. My dad would run radio stations all over the country. And so one thing that he would say to me was, Ann, just play the hits. Play the hits, Ann. So if people want to hear a Taylor Swift song, we're going to play it. We're going to play it a bunch of times because that's what they want. That's resonating. And we don't have to come up with something new every time. When people this is ironic because I'm saying this as an improviser. So literally we would say something different every single time.
Right, yeah.
But Taylor Swift doesn't make up a whole new song list every single time that she goes on stage, right? People want to hear that thing that you're saying more often than not because it becomes these sort of you-isms, whether you're one person, whether it's just you, Brett, when you're delivering something, or if it's this is what our company, we say this all the time in our company. This is what we do. This is how we say things. This is what makes us us. And so saying things over and over and over again, yes, it can get tiring for you the same way that playing certain improv games would get tiring for me, but I would know that the audience was going to respond to them. And so that made it worth keeping until it gets to a point where you realize, oh, no, it's time for us to evolve. And then you can.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to make a corollary for you on this to my world, to the leadership, development, coaching world. We work with managers a lot, and we challenge them. One of the things we really encourage leaders to think about is what can you do to build a sense of pride on your team and in your work group for the work that you do, for the way the team operates, for the product, for the impact, for the mission, for whatever it is. Build a sense of pride among your team. That's one of your jobs as a leader, right? And that's clearly a communication task or exercise. Well, a challenge that I will often give groups of people is I will say, tell me a story that makes you really proud to work here. And it takes a minute sometimes for people to think of a story of something that happened. And when somebody decides to finally share one, I'll say, great, that is amazing. Do you think people know that story? And the person will say, yeah. Usually they'll say, they'll overestimate how many people know the story. They'll say, yeah, I think so. I think they do. I think most people do. And then I'll say, great, show of hands in the room. Raise your hand if you did not know that story. And usually 60, 70, 80% of the hands go up. And these are often leaders in a company, not like someone that just got hired 3 weeks ago, people that have worked there 4, 5, 6 years. And I say, guys, if we're going to build pride, if we're going to, make sure people know the things that they need to know to feel connected to their company, we have to over communicate these things, because you will think people know it and they don't, right? And so I always say, you don't have to tell the story the same way, but you need to tell those stories and do it way more than you think. Does that square with your view of sort of, I don't know, marketing, communication, etc.?
Yes, for sure. Because you're saying it a lot. And especially you're thinking that everyone's heard this, everyone knows it. Yes. And it is okay for you to repeat it because maybe they need to hear it again, or maybe they didn't hear it then because of something like the algorithm has changed. And so you think, oh, I've got all these followers and everyone on my team is following me on LinkedIn. So of course they're also going to hear it here. And they may not, because it doesn't get in front of them, right? Or just in that
percent of your followers will see or whatever, right? It's a fraction. You think they all heard it. They didn't hear it.
They didn't hear it. Or maybe in that second, something else was louder in their brains. So yes, you can keep saying it over and over again. I mean, have you ever seen the documentary Comedian? It came out so long ago, where Jerry Seinfeld is talking about his process in creating an hour-long act. And after 4 months, or an exorbitant amount of time, what we would feel is an exorbitant amount of time, you hear him like sitting down with some other comedians and he's like, yeah, I think I've got about 5 minutes. And you're like, what? But it's because he's got to say the same things. He's sharpening his sword so much to figure out what are the words that are really going to have an impact for this, and saying them in a lot of different ways. And then the ones that are really important, saying them over and over again and honing them so you get really good at telling that story, because not so much that you are a great storyteller, but that you're telling that story because it's the one your audience needs to hear. And it's the story they're going to respond to.
So this conversation has created maybe a new idea that I might use in some of my training workshops and other things. So you tell me if you like this, all right? This is Annie Figenshu inspired, all right? When leaders feel like they've said that thing 100 times, or, it's our quarterly goal, or it's our, mission something related, or it's, just something that we do. What I know from a culture standpoint is rituals are important. Like rituals create culture, right? And so, yeah, we do the same. We start the meeting the same way every time. We whatever. Okay, if you're ever feeling as a leader like you've told a story too many times, or you've communicated an important goal too many times, I think this would be an interesting challenge to say, great, we're going to do it again, but don't do it the same. Be more theatrical. Create more intrigue. Be more inspiring. Think about the way that you communicate the message, and aspire for something that's going to capture more attention or get more buy-in, etc. And really work on not just repeating messaging, but doing what Jerry Seinfeld is doing, figuring out, actually, I know what I want to say, but what can I do to make it more impactful? What do you think about that?
Oh, I love that. So here's ways that you can also add on to that, because saying things to people like make it more impactful, they may not necessarily know what that means. Here are some ways that they can tactical little things that they can do. So for example, if they're telling the story, maybe they will take more time to explain details in that moment, right? So one thing that we used to do on stage is we would conduct the story. And so the conductor would tell you when you needed to stay in the same moment, don't further the plot, but explain in detail a little bit more.
I like it.
Yeah. And then you can move forward at other points to further the plot. And so that's one thing that you can do in telling the story. Another thing that you can do is then ask other people in the room to retell the story. So did they hear it? Can they recall what it was? Because then also that will help you understand what were the words that have impact that people want to remember.
Yes. I love that. So I think this is maybe a good spot to start winding down the conversation, moving toward the end. But I really think that's a message I want people to hear and to remember is, just because your mouth is moving or your fingers are typing or, you're sending something on social or whatever, it doesn't mean that message is landing and it doesn't mean that people are hearing it, right? And so whether this is a function of marketing and brand awareness, or whether we're talking about internal communication on your team, sharpen your sword a little bit here and figure out how you can improve the effectiveness of your communication by capturing attention more effectively, by being a little bit more communicating in a way that people are leaning in and wanting to hear what you're saying and really believe what you're saying. So that's what I'm taking out of this conversation, is learning and thinking more theatrically in how we communicate as leaders, not to put on a show, but to be more effective.
Yes, for sure. I love that. And taking those moments to digest what you're saying and digest what you're getting back from your audience to figure out how you can move forward and how you can tell them things that they need to hear so that way they can improve their work, their job, their impact, their life, whatever it is that you're working with them on.
I love it. I love it. Okay. Is there anything else that you wanted to get into this conversation that we haven't gotten into yet, Annie? You feel like we covered good ground?
I do feel like we covered good ground. I mean, I always think that we can talk a little bit more about musical theater, but I think for now, we're going to just leave it there. I think, yes, I talk about so many of these concepts. I try to bring in as many of the lessons that I've learned from being on stage and from understanding theater and audiences so well. I have that on my blog. I put that out. You can go to downstage.media/blog. I have things every 2 weeks that come out that are just stories where I share stuff from the stage or stuff from clients and put that in with research so that way you can figure out how are the words that you are saying? What is the content that you're putting out? How can you get people to do the thing, not just that you want them to do, but you want them to do because you know it's going to help them. It's going to help make their lives better in some way, shape, or form. So check that out because that is a helpful resource, I think.
Awesome. And I will give a direct testimonial. If you personally are working on your brand and communication, or if maybe your marketing team needs a little creativity or a shot in the arm, reach out to Annie, reach out to Downstage Media.
Downstage.
Can you give the URL one more time where you'd like people to go?
Sure, but just one quick thing. So when you are downstage in theater, that is when you are the closest to the audience. That's what that is in theater world. So like downstage is closest to the audience, upstage is farthest. So downstage.media is my website. You could find me there. I would love to hear from you. So if you have heard this episode and there's something that resonates with you, please send me a little message. I would love to hear what's sticking for you.
Awesome. Okay. Downstage Media, get closer to your audience. Annie Figenshu, thank you for being here. This was fantastic. Appreciate you.
Brett, thank you so much. This was great. And let's do it again sometime.
Want to take the next step to building a stronger culture? We're offering a free 15-minute Better Culture strategy call directly with me. We'll take the time to help you identify real opportunities to make your workplace better. No sales pitch, just real advice to help you lead better. Grab your time right now at betterculture.com/free call. Let's make something even better together.